order the Wednesday, January 10th Chesapeake Bay Board meeting. It is the responsibility of this board, to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay. Roll call, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. May?
Here.
Ms. Bowie? We've three members present. Mr. Waltrip is absent. And Mr. O'Brien, Mr. O'Brien is also absent. What that means for the proceedings tonight is that 3 affirmative votes are needed to pass any resolution.
Very good. Has the board had an opportunity to review the minutes from the December 13th meeting?
Sir.
Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve minutes from December 13th,
As presented.
as presented.
We have a motion to approve, Mr. Wilson? We're just doing all in favor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I'll open a public comment period, which offers the public a chance for community members to express their opinions. Topics discussed shall not be directly related to specific public hearing items. To participate, speakers must provide their name and address for the record. Would anybody care to address the board on matters of general interest this evening? Hearing none, we'll close the public comment period or comment. Move into public hearings. The outline for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board, and then the public hearing will be opened. At any time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. Presentations before the board are subject to time limits. After everyone wishing to speak has done so, the discussion among the board has concluded. The public hearing will be closed. First case this evening is CBPA 23-0165 at 4209 Cliffside Drive. Ms. Benedict.
Chair, members of the board, Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 23-0165. Mr. Andrew Ross with AF Ross LLC has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Douglas and Ms. Susan Miller for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a deck expansion located at 4209 Cliffside Drive. Located at 4209 Cliffside Drive within the Colonial Heritage Subdivision and the Yarmouth Creek Watershed. On the screen above, you'll see the parcel right under the mouse in blue, and then the Yarmouth Creek Watershed boundary there in yellow. This parcel was platted in 2005 after the changes to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 2004. Here is aerial photography of the site as a whole and the topography at the site, as well as the RPA as it affects this property. The total lot size is 0.13 acres, of which 15% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to expand an existing 120 square foot deck located on the rear of the home, and now they want to make it a 420 square foot deck with the addition of new stairs that are 56 square feet. This brings total impacts to the RPA to 356 square feet in the landward 50-foot RPA. So on the site plan above, you'll find the 100-foot resource protection area in red. The existing deck is here in blue, and then the proposed expansion and stairs shown there in yellow. Additionally, looking at it another way, with the house at the top of this plan. Again, the resource protection area, and then more detail on the expansion of the deck and the new stairs. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 9 shrubs, and the applicants have provided a plan shown here with 9 shrubs shown here along the rear of the property. Here are existing conditions. So again, the existing deck and then the area of expansion to the right of this deck. It'll kind of nestle between the neighbor screened-in porch and again, the existing area with the stairs coming off the front of the existing deck, and for a different angle, again, those stairs coming off to the side here. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a deck extension. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a deck is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with this proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for this project. The applicants must submit a surety of $500 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the planting of 9 shrubs. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by January 10th, 2025, and written requests for an extension must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than November 29th, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Questions for staff? Questions? Really straightforward, thank you. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Would anybody care to address this matter before the board? Hearing none, I'll bring it back to the board for any discussion.
Honestly, Mr. Chair, I think this was a pretty straightforward request, minimal impacts, and I would agree with the staff's recommendation to approve this request.
Sure. I will close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-23-0165 at 4209 Cliffside Drive.
Mr. Wilson?
Motion is to adopt. Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 23-0160 at 8810 Pocahontas Trail, Unit 59.
Chairman, members of the board, Emily Crogene, Water of American for a Chesapeake encroachment into the buffer for the above, you'll see the subject parcel in question. Blue. Important to note that the parcel was platted in 1965 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance, showing the entirety of the park. And if we move in further to Unit 59 specifically, right here, we can see the topography existing at the site, along with the resource protection area located on the site as well. Total lot size of the property is 0.03 acres, of which 67% is located within the RPA. The applicant proposing to replace the previously existing 660 square foot mobile home, 780 square foot mobile. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 124 square feet landward 50 foot RPA. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 5 shrubs. If the applicant decides there is no room on the property to perform the required amounts of mitigation, the applicant may pay into the Chesapeake Bay Mitigation Fund in the amount of $500. Here, this is the proposed site plan with the proposed mobile home impacts with inward 50-foot RPA highlighted in yellow, but RPA delineated along with the 50-foot RPA to the see while it is moving away from that 50-foot buffer, it is expanding in size. Site photograph at the entryway to the site, looking towards the rear of the site. This is further back towards the right corner of the site where you can kind of see where that resource is coming from that the buffer is based off of. Have a downslope photograph from the rear of the site, and as you can see, there's existing utility connections, so already existing. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the installation of a mobile home. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the proposed mobile home is larger than the previously existing home. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied to other property owners situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of a substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, and the applicant must submit a surety of $500 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the planting of 5 shrubs or the payment of $500 into the Chesapeake Bay Mitigation Fund. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by January 10th, 2025, and written request for an extension to an exception must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than November 29th, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions at this time, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Emily?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a quick question. So to change this smaller trailer to this larger trailer, is there any additional excavation or clearing of trees to put the larger trailer on the site?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
The site photograph showed what appeared to be earth that had been deposited there. Was that correct?
Yes, there was a previously existing mobile home that's since been removed, so the lot's just as is now.
Is there anything controlling runoff in its current form? I didn't notice silt fence. I did notice what appeared to be real erosion. I'm just curious.
Is there any additional preparation to that site to accommodate the larger mobile home? I mean, is there anything? I think I'm just sort of expanding on Mr. Rodley's question. So where the earth is exposed right now, is there any preparation that goes in advance of a mobile home? I just need a little education here.
In terms of, maybe additional disturbance from, say, utility installation, there's already existing utilities on the site, so that would be a non-issue.
But there's
But
no
otherwise-
gravel that goes down ahead of the placement of a mobile home, or I just don't know.
I could defer that to the contractor.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will open the public hearing. Would the applicant or anyone from the public wish to address the board on this matter? Name and address, please.
Hello, I'm Linda Crone. I'm the property manager for Gibson and Heritage Community LLC, and we're the ones requesting for the mobile home to go in.
Okay, thank you. So I think you heard the flavor of the questions.
Yeah, when they put the mobile home in, we put the sand down first. The blocks go down on top of that. The vapor barrier goes down, and then the skirting is put all around, so there's literally no runoff of the sand because they put that all contained within the mobile home area.
All right, thank you.
And we've
That is-
also moved it up. It was, I believe, 14 foot back from the road. We've moved it up to the 10 feet, so we've actually brought it up 4 foot more than what the other one was. And the other one was destroyed just because it was sitting way far back, and, there was nothing to stop that mobile home from the blocks going underneath and stuff. So my owner is very conscious of all this kind of stuff.
So the soil that we saw in the picture was just from the previous home.
That's from the sand. The Woodland Construction is our installer, and they put down sand underneath each mobile home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Any other
Thank you.
questions?
No, that clarifies.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else care to address the board? Matter is back before the board. Any other discussion? Questions of the applicant?
I don't have any additional discussion items. I would be in support of replacing the previous mobile home.
I will close the public hearing. The matter is before the board.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board, case number CBPA-23-0160 at 8810 Pocahontas Trail, Unit 59.
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Wilson.
Motion to adopt, Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie,
Yes?
Mr. Rodley. Motion passes.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 23-0172 at 109 Thorpes Parish. Ms. Benedict. Emily, good job, by the way. Emily's first case in front of the board.
Chair, members of the board, Robin Benedict, watershed planner, presenting CBPA 23-0172. Mr. Joseph Carlinger with the Structures Group has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Ken and Ms. Christy Tankersley for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the replacement of a retaining wall and construction of a walkway and patio located at 109 Thorpes Parish within the Kingsmill subdivision in the College Creek watershed. You'll see the subject parcel outlined here in blue and the watershed boundary in yellow. This parcel was platted in 1978 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Here's aerial photography of the site, as well as topography, fairly steep slope towards the back of this site heading towards the ravine. And the resource protection area, which encompasses all of the house on the property. The total lot size is 0.69 acres, of which 80% is located within the RPA. Existing conditions on this site include a retaining wall at the edge of this existing patio, and then a retaining wall just in front of that, as well as kind of some pieces of retaining wall here on the left. So the applicants are proposing to remove and replace these failing timber retaining walls on the property. Additionally, they're proposing to construct a walkway along the side of the existing home and replace the existing concrete patio with hardscape pavers. So this is the proposed site plan overall. And then zooming in a little bit closer. So replacing those failing retaining walls now with segmented block retaining walls, both at the edge of the concrete patio and then in front of it. There is a small expansion to the patio. The expansion within the landward 50-foot is in yellow, and then the orange is within the seaward 50-foot. And then the walkway additionally is over here on the left side of the site plan. Again, impacts to the landward are in yellow and seaward are in the orange. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equal 174 square feet in the landward 50-foot RPA and 296 square feet in the seaward 50-foot RPA, for a total of 470 square feet of new impervious cover. Here is another look just at the cross section to show the heights of those retaining walls. This one being against the patio that's going to be replaced, and this one just in front of it. The max height of this retaining wall will be 5 foot 10 inches. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 1 planting unit, which is 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. The applicants have provided a mitigation plan that satisfy this requirement, and that were the green spheres shown on the site plan previously between the 2 retaining walls. That is the proposed mitigation. So here is site photography, standing on the right side, going down the steps. You can start to see where those retaining walls are in rough shape, and moving along, cracking in the deck, and then failing of these retaining walls, as well as the one down in front, starting to fail in multiple places. Additionally, more of the retaining wall on this side that is definitely starting to fail and feel unsafe on that side of the property. And looking back across at those existing walls. Additionally, this is the area of the proposed walkway. This photo is taken upright. It's just at a great slope on this side of the property. The walkway will assist in their transport around the side of their home. That walkway is proposed to be a timber pedestrian walkway. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the replacement of a retaining wall and construction of a walkway and patio. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a retaining wall, walkway, and patio is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with this proposal to be moderate for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicants must submit a surety of $1,000 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the planting of 1 planting unit or 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by January 10th, 2025, and written requests for an extension must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than November 29th, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Any questions for staff?
Could you repeat the amount of new impervious cover, please?
Yes, there is a total of 470 square feet of new impervious cover.
Robin, do you know when this was originally approved, this encroachment?
I do not know off the top of my head, but perhaps the contractor can answer that, or I can get it back to you later.
Just curious. In general, I think we tend to look at these retaining wall structures as helping to control what would otherwise be an eroding slope. And looking at the design, they have backfilled gravel for infiltration and weep holes and so forth. So I'm not as averse to what I'm seeing. I was just curious when it was originally constructed. Anything else for staff? Thank you very much. We'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant or anybody in the public care to address this case? Name and address, please.
Joe Kralinger, Structures Group, 1200 Old Colony Way. I'm the structural engineer for this project, and I'm here to answer any sort of questions the board may have.
Questions for Mr. Kralinger?
Don't have any.
I don't either, quite frankly. The design was fairly complete. I didn't see any. I mean, you get the splash apron and the gravel behind it to create infiltration. So it's being replaced. The structures are being replaced where the existing structures are currently located.
That's correct. That's correct. There's two terraced walls. They're both being replaced, and we're removing the retaining wall around to capture that slope to prevent further erosion.
Very good. Thank you. Say hello to your dad. Anybody else care to address the board on this matter? Matter is back to the board. Any questions or discussion?
Mr. Chair, I would just agree with your earlier comments that this appears to be a necessary action to stabilize the slope, and it appears to be a very well thought out plan to have replaced that existing failing structure. So I would be in support of this.
I would as well. With that, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional discussion? And if not, a motion, please.
To adopt the resolution to grant the request for the Chesapeake Bay Board, case number CBPA 23-0172, located at 109 Thorpes Parish.
Motion to adopt. Mr. Wilson.
Motion to adopt, Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie, Mr. Roadley.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 23-0175 at 160 John Browning. Emily.
Chairman, members of the board, Emily Grogine, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 23-0175. Micah Miller of Easton Outdoors has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Sean Reddy and Glenn Ballard for encroachment into the RPA buffer for the construction of a pool, patio, pavilion, and retaining walls located at 160 John Browning, which is within the Kings Mill subdivision and the Skiffs Creek watershed. As you can see here, the subject parcel is highlighted in blue with the Skiffs Creek watershed boundary outlined in yellow. The parcel was platted in 1995 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The 2004 ordinance revisions placed an RPA on this lot. I have an aerial image of the subject parcel with the location of the proposed work, as well as the topography, the resource protection area, and then total lot size of this property is 0.95 acres, of which 53% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to construct a pool, patio, pavilion, and retaining walls behind the existing home. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equal 1,140 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 3 planting units, or 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 9 shrubs. The applicants have provided a mitigation plan equaling 8 canopy trees, 13 understory trees, and 31 shrubs, which exceeds county mitigation requirements. If you look above you, you'll see the site plan more zoomed out. Here we have the 50-foot resource protection area along with the proposed work that's within the 100-foot resource protection area noted in yellow. If we take a closer look, you'll see the overall patio and the pavilion that's proposed. Along the back here, you'll see the retaining wall, which is to go with the length of the proposed patio, in addition to the proposed pool. And again, the delineation of the 100-foot resource protection area and 50-foot resource protection area. Here you will see a stake noting the start of the pavilion, kind of looking out at that resource, which the buffer is based off of. Here it's a similar view, just more outward, looking again at that same resource. That is the basis for the delineation. And out here you'll see the outer portion of the pavilion showing part of the extent of the proposed work. Looking this way, you'll see the stakes back here denote the furthest extent of the proposed work in the rear, where that retaining wall will be, kind of following along the side here. Again, similar to the previous photos, kind of showing that extent of the proposed work. This also right here shows you where that pool will be going in. And then this is a closer up shot of that same staking for the pool, in addition to where the retaining wall will end back here and then continue along the rear. This is a downward slope image of that retaining wall and the furthest extent of the proposed work in the back. Sorry, the mouse is. And then again, a downward slope image of that pool and the extent of the proposed retaining wall. And then finally, just going back to the other side of the site here, where that pavilion is, again, you see the extent of the proposed work here. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a pool, patio, pavilion, and retaining walls. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a pool, patio, pavilion, and retaining walls is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23.7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied to other property owners situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be moderate for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicants must submit a surety of $3,000 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plan equaling 3 planting units or 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 9 shrubs. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by January 10th, 2025, and written request for an extension to an exception must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than November 29th, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any further questions from the board, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Any questions for staff?
Yes, I've got a question. There's a decent slope on the back of that property there. Is there a known erosion problem there currently, or is it pretty stable currently?
Anything pertaining to the slope, I would defer to the contractor because they could answer that better than I could.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Hearing none, we will open the public hearing. Thank you, Emily. Would the applicant or their agent or anybody from the public care to address the board? Name and address for the record, please.
Micah Miller, 160 John Browning is the property that I'm representing. Three things on this project. We are removing some existing concrete driveway that's wrapping around the back of the property, and in its place there will be a slate walkway, also a 45-foot long pondless waterfall that's going in that place to have a pollinator garden, which is the homeowner's request.
Gotcha.
The pavers that are inside, actually all the pavers in the backyard are actually permeable pavers. So they have what's called a resin sand, a nitro sand in there that allows water to go down into a permeable base that we're putting underneath all of the pavers.
Are you doing a collections, not hesitate to interrupt you, but are you doing a collection system associated with that
So
under
all
drain?
of the downspouts are going into the 1,500-gallon basin of the waterfall, but there's only a 10-inch reservoir underneath the actual pavers themselves. Yeah, but it does have an oversized 1,500-gallon reservoir in the actual pondless waterfall to collect water from the downspouts that are dumping down the hill.
I've jumped to questions out of sequence with your presentation. I apologize.
fine.
But the retaining walls, I didn't see much detail on how those would be constructed in what I viewed. Can you give us a little bit more
Yeah.
information?
They're fairly minor. The slope isn't significant. It maybe is somewhere between 12 and 18 inches as a whole. So more or less the base of the paver structure is what they're holding back. They're not holding back much more than that. The slope is mostly being captured actually by the water feature itself through the boulders that we're placing in that slope. And that area that we're using is actually about the flattest part of that backyard.
I know you've said you're using pervious pavers. The county, I think, takes a different view of pervious pavers and considers them impervious for the purposes of calculations.
Correct.
And in fairness, over time, they can be difficult to maintain and can clog the pores, and then you end up with sheet flow runoff. In the event that happens, how might you accommodate that sheet flow in a manner that doesn't promote erosion downslope?
Yeah, so our mitigation plantings are actually on the outset of the area of the pavers, so the slope will actually be into the mitigation plantings themselves. But also the sand that we're using in the joints, I hesitate to use the word sand. It's very different than what most people are used to, like a polymeric sand or a joint sand. It's actually, it's sand that has resin on it, and you actually use a hose to wash it into the joints of the pavers, and you continue washing until all the resin that's not holding the individual sand molecules is actually washed away. And what that does is it gives you actually a perfectly level surface that can absorb water at the same rate as what a typical permeable paver patio would do, which is those eights, and those eights that you're referring to do get clogged fairly often. But this does allow for a surface that can be easily blown off and doesn't clog up as easily. The mitigation plantings at the outset, grabbing runoff, that could happen, and then a new age kind of technology for the actual joints of the. And that wasn't in the, sorry, now I'm interrupting you, but that wasn't in the actual, we didn't use the permeable pavers as any bit of the calculations for the shrubs. And we've gone way over, not from coming before the board, because we actually didn't recognize that it was until Kings Mill brought it to our attention that it was inside of the RPA. But it was more of what the homeowners requested to have those plants, not so much from a mitigation standpoint.
No, I understand. I'm just reliving the numerous properties we've gone back to where you end up with real erosion because of the water leaving the site isn't being controlled in any manner. And as an example, often when we're dealing with impervious surfaces, whether it's a structure or a patio, a building structure or a patio, we sometimes are looking for catchments where that water can be directed to. Now, I know you said going to the mitigation beds, just again, concern for long-term, not the short-term, but long-term performance after you're gone and they're living with it, so.
Yeah, so the overall impact that the roof and the gutters that are going currently just straight down the hill, we're actually capturing about 80% of that water, which is far exceeds the impervious area that we're adding to the backyard. We're capturing about 3,000 square feet of the house, about 80% of that 3,000 square feet, and putting it actually into a catchment basin that has 45 feet of stream running that's going to have plants growing in it and boulders.
What is the overflow for that catchment?
That overflow is actually just straight over the patio, because the patio has that 10-inch reservoir underneath of it with the filter fabric underneath of it. And we've built this before in York County and had no issues. And is also a VCAP approved design as well.
Gotcha.
And this project is approved by VCAP as well to meet their permeable paver rebate program.
Well, thank you. Sorry to grill you, but
That's fine.
unfamiliar with the application in this case. Any other questions for Mr. Miller?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else care to address the board on this matter? Excuse me. Then the matter is back to the board. Any additional discussion? I'll start by just saying this is a little unusual for us in that there's usually some thought given to, well, I would hesitate to say Mr. Miller's given thought to it, but usually a design feature that accounts for potential overflow of runoff. If I can perhaps ask staff's opinion of these pavers and this application in the 10-inch reservoir, if they care to offer an opinion.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mike Wilson, Section Chief. I'd be happy to offer an opinion. I was unaware until a couple minutes ago that it was VCAP approved, which means that it has undergone a level of scrutiny from the Soil and Water District and has been approved for their grant rebate program. That makes me feel much more confident in what he was describing. He is right. I've not heard of the polymeric or the resin sand. Typically, sand joints are the polymeric sand, and they do tend to clog up over time. Sounds like the overflow situation, I had a concern as well. Sounds like they've taken that into account, and the 10-inch reservoir under the patio should accommodate a normal rain event. Yesterday's rain event, I would suggest to all of y'all, was not a normal rain event.
Fair enough.
Would you like me to keep going?
Nope. You answered my question. Thank you very much. The one point that Mr. Wilson brought up that I have a hard time not focusing on is normal rain event versus what we experienced yesterday, because those events do happen and can potentially lead to issues We can't size generally everything for all storm events, but I am concerned for those events that do cause that reservoir to fill. Mr. Miller, the public hearing's still open. You have any comments that you'd care to share with the board? Understanding our concern?
Yeah, I'm hearing it for sure. I think one way that it could be handled, so the property is oddly situated, and that kind of gave me a lot of trouble with the original design, trying to figure out how to fit what is not a huge space in this backyard. I mean, it looks big because I have it pulled away from the house, and I could redesign it to pull it closer to the house, but it kind of negates some of the design elements that the homeowner wanted, and especially the water feature being the primary element. But one thing that we have done in the past is, instead of the overflow of the water feature just simply kind of spreading to the area, we've kind of created a secondary basin that's protected by EPDM liner. So right now we have a 1,500-gallon basin. We could easily take maybe, say, 500 gallons of that, and instead of wrapping it in actual liner, we could wrap that in a filter fabric that's already down about 3 feet in this feature as designed. So at that 3-foot point, you now have 500 gallons of overflow that is only wrapped in filter fabric that generally can self dissipate into the soil.
So there's no under drain, it's just a gravity.
Yeah, it's kind of like the concept of the dry wells, just kind of a glorified dry well at that point, which allows for some rapid filling in an event like last night. And then, over the previous week, it would probably take a week to empty, would be my guess.
So would that be incorporated into it would be, if I interpreted your comments correctly, incorporated into the footprint of what you've proposed?
Yes, it would be. So as you see, like that blue line that kind of hooks and goes down, is this on? That blue line that kind of hooks and goes straight down towards where the fireplace is going to be. A lot of that area right there where the cursor is right now, that's the basin. So we could just divide that basin up into one kind of being a wetland bog of sorts, and then the other portion being for capturing rainwater and then recycling it. There's a reasonable amount of splash in the water features. So a water feature like this uses about 50 gallons a week from splash and things happening and stuff like that at this length. So that was kind of the thought process. The basin just running that water constantly will use up a reasonable amount, but it's large enough that they would never have to actually add water in it because of rain, even on extended summers.
Question for staff: if Mr. Miller was to amend his application to include that, does that require a resubmittal of graphics?
No, we could, with the board's okay, we could work with him to amend as he's described without having to continue to a future board meeting.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. As I said earlier, the public hearing is still open. Would anybody else care to address the board? Hearing none, the matter is back to the board, and any additional discussion?
I think, Mr. Chair, I share your concerns. This is certainly not the normal method that we've seen, so it certainly does cause some concern, and described as some new age technology. That's not something that's kind of true and tried and tested, and so we would be kind of taking a chance, I would think. So I have a little concern about that it's not typically what we see, but I understand that there is technology, and I'm certainly in support of technology. But I think I would be in support of this proposal with the addition of the requirements that you mentioned and that Mr. Wilson mentioned and that the applicant described.
Bowie, any comments?
How is it that we make note of the suggested changes at this point in
It would be a
moving
part of the
forward?
motion to approve.
Okay, it would be part of the motion.
If there's no other comments from the public, I will close the public hearing and bring the matter for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-23-0175 at 160 John Browning, with the understanding that the additional capture that was described by the applicant and understood by the board would be added to the proposal.
Motion to adopt with amendment, Mr. Wilson.
Motion to adopt as amended for additional storage, Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie? Yes. Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 23-0171 at 131 George Sandys.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 23-0171. Mr. Joseph Carlinger with the Structures Group has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Ms. Tammy Short for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the replacement of an existing retaining wall located at 131 George Sandys within the Kingsmill subdivision in the Skiffs Creek watershed. The parcel is outlined in blue above, and then the watershed boundary shown in yellow. This parcel was platted in 1999 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Here is aerial photography of the parcel along with topography at the site and resource protection area on the site. The total lot size of this property is 0.42 acres, of which 17% is located within the RPA. On this site currently is an existing timber retaining wall that actually spans across not only 131 George Sandys, but also the parcel above and to the left of it. The parcel above being owned by Escalante Kingsmill Resort, and the parcel to the left being Kingsmill Community Association. Additionally, on that Escalante property, there is conservation easement. So on this site plan, you'll see the property line shown in blue and the existing retaining wall in yellow right above that, starting on the 131 George Sandy property, coming up onto the property above, and then across to the property on the left. Additionally, this existing retaining wall is failing. So the applicants are proposing to remove this existing retaining wall and construct a new one that is entirely within the property lines of 131 George Sandys. Additionally, the applicants are proposing to remove the areas of existing hardscaping on the property. So the areas in yellow here and the bit here on the right that are within the landward RPA. Here is that proposal, again showing the 100-foot RPA here and the new segmented block retaining wall here in yellow that is entirely on this property. So in total, the applicants are proposing to remove 611 square feet of impervious hardscape from the RPA. As there is no increase in impervious material, no mitigation is required for this project. Here is a cross-section of the proposed wall. It will be 7'6" at its maximum height. And here is site photography starting at the side that is on 131 George Sandys and looking across. You can see it is starting to bow out in places and is definitely in the process of failing. Moving across the property, looking at this corner back across, some of the current status of the wall itself. This is the piece of the retaining wall that is on the property to the left that is owned by Kingsmill, as well as you can see part of the hardscaping that will be removed. The retaining wall being here or along this side, and again, just some of the hardscaping along here that's going to be removed from the resource protection area. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the replacement of an existing retaining wall. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a retaining wall is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with this proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by January 10th, 2025, and written request for an extension must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than November 29th, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Questions?
No question.
Robin? Thank you very much.
Thank
I will open the public hearing. Would the applicant or their agent care to address the board?
Joe Crowninger of the Structures Group, 1200 Old Colony Lane. I'm here to answer any questions that the board may have on this project.
Just curious, was the original construction an oops that crossed the property line?
I do not know. I don't know if they had an original survey for the property. I'm not sure. But
Sure.
permission from Escalante as well as KCSA will be received in writing prior to anyone performing any work on this project.
Fairly significant wall there at the back corner.
That is correct.
I don't have any questions. Any other members of the board have any questions? Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Would anybody else care to address the board on this matter? I'll pull it back to the board for discussion.
Mr. Chair, I think this seems pretty straightforward. I like the idea they're removing about 611 square feet of impervious to replace a failing retaining wall with a similar structure that's actually on the property. So I would be in support of this.
I agree.
No objections.
Okay. With that, I will close the public hearing. The matter is before the board. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-23-0171 at 131 George Sandys.
Mr. Wilson?
Motion is to adopt. Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley? Motion passes.
Excuse me, just getting over a cold. Ms. Benedict, I noticed that, it's a status update for CBPA 230174 at 275 Old Stage Road.
I'm Benedict, Watershed Planner. Mr. Mark Boyd of Kimley Horn and Associates has requested a deferral of this application, CBPA 23-0174, for exception to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance, while the site plan is finalized for the project. Staff concurs with this request.
So there'll be no hearing for this particular item.
Correct.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 23-0183 at 275 Old Stage Road. So is this the same or different?
This is a different application, sir. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 23-0183. Mr. Mark Boyd of Kimley Horn and Associates has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of LI Hazelwood Farms for encroachments into the RPA buffer for grading associated with the construction of a building. In this case, it is building number 6. This application is located at 275 Old Stage Road within the Diascan Creek watershed. Above is the entire subject parcel outlined in blue, as well as the watershed boundary in yellow. Zooming in, looking at aerial photography of the site as a whole, the project area is this little arm of the parcel, and get a little bit better view of where this building is going to be constructed, as well as topography at the site and the resource protection area on the left side of this site. The total lot size of the property is 194 acres, of which 26% is located in the RPA. The RPA delineation was completed by Kerr Environmental and was confirmed by James City County staff in October of 2015. The revised delineation was completed by Wetland Studies and Solution and was confirmed by James City County staff in August of 2023. The applicant is proposing to construct a building in association with the Lovett Commerce Center construction. This is the construction as a whole. The building in question is building number 6 over here on the right side of this plan. Zooming in specifically on this building, this is the RPA that was shown earlier, and the building in question right here. Impacts to the RPA will be caused by the associated grading for the building's construction. Those impacts are shown here in yellow. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 5,333 square feet. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts is the recordation of a deed of natural open space for an area twice the size of the impacted RPA. In this case, that would be 10,666 square feet. We also have those impact areas shown in even more detail. Again, for the grading of the building, this impact area 8 is 1,827 square feet, and impact area 9 is 3,506 square feet. This section, or these photographs, are for the section of the building that is not within the RPA, but just gives a general idea of where this building is located. This field off of Old Stage Road currently sits like this. There is Old Stage Road along here. This picture was taken along Leisure Road. This is the area of the RPA, or where the RPA lies. Standing more in those impact areas, looking upslope, then down towards the ravine where the RPA stems from. And again, just across some of those areas that will be impacted by this construction. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the grading associated with this construction of a building. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the project is outside the scope of an administrative approval. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with this proposal to be moderate for the proposed development. Should the board find that the exception request meets all 5 conditions outlined above, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicant must record a deed of natural open space in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse for the additional 0.24 acres of natural open space beyond that which is required to meet stormwater management compliance for the project prior to the issuance of a land disturbing permit. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by January 10th, 2026. And written request for an extension must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than November 29th, 2025, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Any questions for staff?
I don't have any.
Robin, I have a question. Has this site plan been before the board previously? I did miss a couple meetings in the fall, so I'm asking, not poking you, but
This plan has not been before the Chesapeake Bay Board before.
just curious, the matter that was withdrawn, is that the area that's shaded on the site plan?
Yes, sir.
My reason for asking is usually for a master site plan like this, looking at purpose and need and what's driving the proposed encroachment, there's a rebuttable presumption that the building could be moved to an area that's not currently shown for development. And I know that there is a plan at some point for that, but I'm just curious if that had been discussed with staff at all.
To reference the part that is shaded on this plan, the applicant is still working on that portion of the plan, making, you know, the final changes and details. It has been deferred now to a future meeting. As for the impacts associated here, I will let the applicant detail what other options they've explored.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? I will open the public hearing. Would the applicant or his agent care to address the board?
Before that, I do have 2 public comments that I'd like to read into the
very good.
record.
Thank you.
Thank you. First comment comes from an adjacent property owner. My name is Rhonda McCree, and I am the adjacent property owner at 223 Old Stage Road in Toano. Both my brother, the co-owner, and I are disabled and cannot appear in person, but want to voice our strong opposition to this variance to allow encroachment into the resource protection area to build a very large building on this rural site. As you may know, the community was adamantly opposed to the zoning changes that allowed the development of this agricultural land when it was approved by the Board of Supervisors in 2022. We believe then and continue to believe that the noise, traffic, light pollution, and environmental impact will erode the peaceful enjoyment and market value of our land that has been in my family for 120 years. While we were unhappy with this decision to allow the Hazelwoods to go forward, the neighbors took some comfort in the knowledge that these developers would be forced to work within the existing laws and environmental regulations. To allow them to simply apply for a variance whenever these regulations do not align with their goals flies in the face of having them. Please do not allow this. Please protect the rights of adjacent property owners by denying this variance. It is already costly and difficult enough to secure insurance without the worry about water runoff and other concerns that can potentially arise by granting this encroachment. The The, 2nd comment is also by an adjacent property owner. We are the owners of 101 Leisure Road, directly across the street from planned building number 6 at 275 Old Stage Road in Toano, also known as the Hazelwood Farms property. When the Board of Supervisors passed the zoning for the land use, they essentially gave up the right to control what will be built on that site. The site plan presented at that time showed an attractive campus-style business park. The Hazelwoods mentioned directly to us that the ravine across the street from our property was wetlands and non-buildable, as they were very familiar with our property location and the proximity to Hazelwood Farms. The proposed building number 6 in that proposed site plan will definitely affect adjacent land values and disturb the preferred quality of life that has been afforded to the community. The current plan shows a massive concrete building that encroaches on the wetland area and will destroy the natural habitat for many native plants and animals, possibly including the marbled salamander, listed as endangered species in several states. Other reptiles, including eastern king snakes and copperheads, are well known in the area. Many species of amphibians, including several species of tree frogs and other salamanders, are prevalent in the immediate area. Has a proper wetland study been completed to identify these plants and animals? If not, will the board request one prior to approving any projects? The Chesapeake Bay Board has a responsibility to protect the wetlands, flora, and fauna in the waterways of Virginia. It is imperative that the board use consistent decision-making in determining the level of impact that will occur to the wetlands and watershed. Allowing encroachments into the wetlands for this project will come under scrutiny of past and future decisions made by the board. You must remain consistent and equitable. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Who was that, the name of that property owner? I apologize.
That property owner was Dave Osman and Pam Lundberg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. With that, I'll open the public hearing with the applicant or his agent. Name and address, please.
Sir. Mark Boyd, I'm with Kinley Horn. We're at 2035 Maywell Street in Richmond, Virginia.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm here as well with Ben Swift with Lovett Industrial, who's the owner and developer of the project. And we're here to field any questions that you may have about the proposed application.
So I'll start with my initial question to staff or comment to staff on the site plan and kind of where you are with site plan development. Usually, in my experience, we come to the table, at least for this initial review, with a site plan that occupies the space in question. Otherwise, you get into, well, can you move this there to avoid impacts here? So I'll ask the question of you.
Sure. Yeah, the site plan in question is under review at the county. We're under a second review at this stage. And the 4 buildings that are shown here, buildings 1, 2, 3, and 6, are all inclusive of that site plan. So as far as moving a building to a different location, that all the locations that are shown and were approved as part of the rezoning are consistent with what's being shown on the current site plan.
The area to the east that is not represented with a structure on it yet, is that part of your developable area?
It is part of the overall land, and it was considered as Land Bay Area 3 in the rezoning, and it was designated for commercial use. That is not part of the proposed development we are currently under review and site plan development with. So that's currently going to remain undeveloped at this stage.
But it is part of the overall project area.
It is.
So if you wanted to, you could move the building over to that location.
Well, it was designated as commercial, not industrial, which would not allow us to put that industrial building there.
I think that answers my question. Have you applied for your core and DEQ permits for the waterway crossings?
We've been under review. We've gotten comments back from both DEQ and the Corps. We have addressed comments and resubmitted, and we are waiting on the approved permit here.
Just out of curiosity, since one of the adjacent property owners brought it up, any amphibian studies, maybe salamander, what have you, required as part of those submissions?
There were endangered species reports that were done. I don't believe that any of those species showed up on this site. Ben, is that correct? Yeah.
I assume a small world begonia survey was done as well, came up negative. Bat?
Bats are there, so we are working within the confines of clearing
Your
limits that are
restrictions?
time of restriction. Yes.
Anything else I'm missing? I think you've answered my question. I'm just trying to make sure that the adjacent property owners are heard. And I know, I understand intimately the process that you go through with the Corps and DEQ, and I know it can be exhausting, and a lot of those factors are brought to bear during that review. And just for the sake of the public, you know, our review is somewhat limited in that context to the Ches Bay areas, and in this case, the buffer. So I'm mindful of that, but certainly want to give some wind to the comments that were presented.
Sure. Yeah. I think we've spent a lot of time and effort in an effort to limit the amount of impacts that are taken on the environmental areas. So as you can see on the overall plan, there are some crossings associated with the road that are under a separate application and with some of our stormwater outfalls, but in large part, the site really works within the confines of the environmental areas and works outside of those. The impacts associated with Building 6 that we're discussing here are limited to grading. There's actually no impervious area within the RPA. So it is grading that will be stabilized and seeded at the end of the day, and will return to a grassed area. So like I said, there's no impervious area within that. And we are planning to mitigate all of the impacts on the site with some of the other area that we have that really could help create an additional buffer to the park to the south.
Out of curiosity, did you explore the option of your main access road to the north? I know you would still have some jurisdictional crossings, but just curious if that was an avoidance and minimization measure.
We didn't with this site plan. This was the approved route that was done with the rezoning. So that was not a part of our site plan, but we did change and adjust the road alignment to cross in the smallest areas possible to limit and minimize those impacts.
Any other questions from the board? Sorry to monopolize the floor here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else care to address the board at this time? Oh, go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Darlene Prebish, and I'm at 211 Old Stage Road. I know that you were here to discuss the impacts to the RPAs, but I want to make sure I understand, because this isn't my typical knowledge base. Am I seeing, when this plan initially came about, we were given a very specific kind of a site plan overview of what to expect. Is this building encroaching on the RPA more than they expected it to initially?
So I have to apologize. I didn't see the initial document that perhaps you were shown. From what I've seen in the application, the building itself is not encroaching into the RPA. It's merely the slope of the fill that is used to create the pad.
Are they expecting this grading of the project to create more issues within that RPA area than they expected initially when the site plan was approved by the Board of Supervisors last year.
And I can't answer that because I wasn't part of that review. I will say this, as site plans go from concept to engineering and design, often they are refined with the constraints that exist on a property, whether it's topography or environmental resources. So I don't know that the building has changed in footprint, but they may have realized after they got to engineering that the toe of that slope did encroach beyond a previously existing line.
Because originally when it was planned, there were to be 2 traffic circles, and now there's 1. And I'm sure part of that is due to the fact that you couldn't use as much of that additional space up above it if you had 2 traffic circles. The other thing that's seriously concerning, the property right there on that straight piece of road by Leisure Road, from that building corner all the way down to the curve, all of that is that open land that you saw, and that property across from it was the first lady who evidently wrote that letter. The next piece of property down behind her was the second, but that entire first piece of property is nothing but open space. And when this was originally proposed, we were told we would have all these buffers and we wouldn't see this. This is a 36-foot building here. And I'm just concerned because, number one, I know conceptually things change, but this is so out of what we were told to expect with this project that I'm not sure why we aren't putting these larger buildings away, because everything else is treed land. Why isn't this building going back behind the trees like we were told, so that it would not affect the scenic view from Route 30, what would be seen as soon as you come off the interstate? I'm just really, and this may not be within your scope, but I don't know how you can have a building that large and not have it that close to an RPA and not have any effects whatsoever. When Stonehouse was proposed and began to be built, they were told, that they were going to do all of these things. And then later, once it began to be built and then it grew and more pieces and parts to this property were added, what ended up happening was some people over off of Old Stage Road on the opposite side had their trees dying because so much runoff was coming into the creeks back there that it literally, one of our neighbors now had all these trees dying and falling because of that. And I really have a hard time understanding, with the amount of truck stalls, the amount of cars, the amount of coming and going, and a building this size, that close to that watershed area, how they're going to mitigate the issues with this. And I secondly feel blindsided that we were told one thing. We're gonna do our best to make it look park-like. And Rhonda was exactly right. That is exactly what we were told. And then, we knew we had retail going up by the street. We knew that there were going to be these buildings, and we knew it was 3 million square feet. But I think personally, a building that size could have been placed on another piece of property within that area. Now, you may not have been able to sell quite as many buildings if you did that, but I think it could have been done. And that's just what I have to say.
Well, thank you for your comments. One moment. Would anybody else care to address? And I'll ask if you would try to keep them to what we have jurisdiction over, even though I do appreciate the comments.
Good evening. My name is Ed Lampett. I'm a resident in neighboring Meadow Lake neighborhood, 2616 Meadow Lake Drive. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but I guess I have a question, if I'm allowed to pose it. On the Lovett website, it refers to this as Building 6. And tonight, or it's the opposite. On the website, it's referring to it as 4, and tonight we're calling it 6. I didn't know.
Yeah.
We are all talking.
Your comments to me.
Yeah, we're all talking the same building in the same location. On that corner, just by chance, I guess I feel like I have an obligation to make sure the board members know there is wildlife that's sensitive. I filmed, and I've got it here, and I can make it part of the record if you'd like. A bald eagle's flying right there, landing exactly on that corner, which I happily show you. The bald eagles are there, of course, because the water's there, and water's nearby. And so I would just flag that even though they're not endangered species, I guess there is the golden and bald eagle. You know it better than I do, which has to do with habitat and all that. So I would just, as long as you know about it and it can be mitigated, then I understand. But I want to let you know that there is film, if you'd like to see it, that shows the bald eagles exactly on that corner.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
take care. Thank you.
Excuse me, good evening. Ben Swift with Lovett Industrial, the applicant, and address 923 15th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. And I think, Mark did a great job explaining as it relates to the RPA, but I'd also like to address some of the public comments. One is that, no landscaping is shown on this plan, and I'm happy to, after this meeting, go through with them and even frankly show them some images of the landscaping, because I think this may be misleading in terms of what is actually in the buffer, especially on Leisure Road. There is significant landscaping and things that will block the view, and as well, just to address those two land bay areas down, I guess, Plan South, and also reference why it's called Building 6 is because those will come as a later phase and have buildings planned for that. But that is a later phase that is not part of this application at all.
But you understand the concept
Yeah,
of single
absolutely.
and complete, so
Absolutely.
that all of the impacts can be reviewed at one time, and it's not a piecemeal effort to impact one, because now impact one justifies impact two. That
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm also here to answer any questions you have.
And I was going to ask Mark again, but I'll ask you, and if Mark needs to answer, fine. Had you looked at increasing the slope of those fill areas to further minimize the encroachment into the RPA?
Let Mark answer, but I believe we might be at the maximum slope allowed. Okay.
Are you required to have fire access around the whole building or just around the backside? I'm just curious from a...
Building 6 specifically. So we
Yes.
do have a road.
Just for clarity, that's the only thing that's before us tonight, if I'm not misunderstanding.
Correct. Yes, we do have a road that encompasses the entire building, so there will be fire access around the entire building.
Staff, could you go back to the site plan? I just didn't recall seeing that. Oh. Still don't see it.
So that sliver, just on the short edge of Building 6, so that is in fact a ring road. That's a 30-foot
right
wide
there.
road. Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, so the Building 6 is the heavy line. What we're seeing out in front where the fill is part of the parking area? So I'm going to ask the obvious question, Mark. Can you pull it back? Can you pull the building back, or you have an offset from Leisure Road?
Yeah, hi. So we are against the buffer along Old Stage and along Leisure, trying to stay within the confines of that. And then within the confines of the development as well. So we've pulled the parking as far back as we could. We've tried to mitigate to the maximum extent practical. The slope of that area is at 3-to-1 right now. I know the county typically doesn't like to go steeper than that. So we intend to stabilize that slope and minimize any potential impacts of the area. And we have a robust stormwater plan that was a part of the rezoning and the properties that were conditioned on the site to help mitigate the entire site as an overall.
Will you be revegetating that slope in post-construction?
Yes, it will be seeded and eventually probably left to go to its natural state for the most part. It's an area that doesn't need much maintenance.
Won't be maintained.
Right.
By maintained, I'm basically referring to tree cutting. So allowing it come back to a wooded state. Thank you both very much. Any other questions for Mark or Mr. Swift? No. Thank you. I can appreciate the concern from residents, neighbors, adjacent property owners. I also live in this part of the county, although I do not live directly adjacent to this project. And responsible development is, I think, what we're all hoping for when projects move forward. I've been in the business for 34 years of land development on the environmental side, and I've seen it a lot worse. Crossings of ravines or creeks generally become a requirement of most site plans, hard to avoid, direct impacts. There can be some tweaking of road alignments. Personally, I view the minor encroachment for the fill of the Building 6 parking area to be a fairly minor encroachment that will be restored once construction's complete. I'm more interested in the stormwater outfalls and how they're controlling downstream erosion, which will directly have a bearing on the health of that stream system. So that's my opinion, not meant to sway the board, just my comments. Happy to entertain any other thoughts or discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I share your concern. I know you mentioned earlier by evaluating this plan piecemeal, where we may approve something up front here, but then we may get pigeonholed on the back end and end up getting pinched potentially, because then we'd be setting things and then having to just work around that. So I have one concern about the piecemeal approach here. I have a second concern that I'm kind of battling with, in that, typically if this is a large commercial project. In the past, when we have say Ford's Colony, for instance, and we have a home that's being constructed in a very similar situation like this, and one of the things that we can look at is it the minimum necessary to afford relief? If the applicant's trying to build a 3,000 square foot house on that area, and the minimum for that neighborhood or that section is 1,500 square feet, we would push the applicant to try to bring it down to that, minimum necessary to afford relief. This is different because we don't have that, that metric to look at. But I do wonder if this condition is self-created or self-imposed, that because of the size of the building, it is encroaching into the RPA. So could the size of the building, it's a large building, could it be made smaller to not impact the RPA? So those are my two main concerns. I agree with you that this clearing encroachment essentially is very minor, and that it's going to be restored back to natural in the future after construction. But I do have concerns about the piecemeal approach, and I have concerns about being self-imposed.
Ms. Bowie, any other comments or observations?
I agree with the things that Mr. May said. I feel like there's information that maybe hasn't been presented to us tonight that might be helpful, just in seeing the bigger picture. So I guess that would be my
The
perspective at this
information
point.
on the bigger picture referring to all of the proposed impacts for the project?
Correct.
I can appreciate those comments. I have not closed the public hearing. The matter is still open for comment if the applicant would care to address.
Hello again. Just to address the quote-unquote piecemeal approach, that's certainly not our intent by any means. It is broken out into separate applications, one for Building 6 that we're currently talking about, one for the road alignment and the administrative pond outfalls, and then another one for Building 1 that we are deferring at the moment. We are by no means intending to come back for additional encroachments on Building 6. This is the extent of the impacts that are shown. We just felt with the Building 1, we wanted to continue reviewing that before bringing it in front of the board. So I hope that helps kind of address that concern.
I appreciate that. It does and it doesn't, in the sense that it doesn't make all of the impacts known, because all we're looking at is what we're looking at. You know, I appreciate revisiting it, getting it right, so to speak. But I think the three of us on the board kind of all share a common concern for that approach. So I'll just try to be kind in that regard. The other question that perhaps is addressable is the size of Building 6. And, you know, I know you probably have looked at this, how much would you have to decrease the size of the building to effectively eliminate the impact? And how does that impact your business plan and so forth?
I'll defer to Ben on that question.
So as it relates to Building 6 impacts, we actually, to remove any impacts, we would be able to, without encroaching into the RPA, put in retaining walls. So we wouldn't have to adjust the size of the building. Obviously, you know, it's been approved for 3 million feet, and our total build out is significantly less than that. And there is a level of economic impact there. So we would likely just insert retaining walls. But our base intent would be to try and keep it in its natural state after its construction is completed and it restored.
So if push came to shove, retaining wall instead of fill slope. I think you're hearing the push and the shove. So the matter is open. It's before you, it's your application. The board can take action on it right now. Or if you choose to amend your proposal, then you would request a deferral. I'll leave the matter to you.
Go ahead and defer to February.
So there is a request to defer the application till the February meeting of the Chesapeake Bay Board. Can I have a motion?
And Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to accept the deferral request from the applicant.
And just as a reminder, the public hearing is still open and will stay open until the matter is reconvened. Mr. Wilson?
So the motion is to accept the deferral. Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie, Mr. Roadley.
Yes.
Motion has, application has been deferred to the February meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, and thank you all for your comments. If I'm not mistaken, that is the last item under board consideration, last public hearing under board considerations. CBPA 22-0120-108 Mercar.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Daniel McCormick is requesting a one-year extension to CBPA 22-0120, originally granted on January 11th, 2023. Staff concurs with this request with the stipulation that all permit conditions except for the expiration date be reauthorized and that the new date of expiration be January 11th, 2025.
You need a motion? Motion to adopt staff request to grant the extension for CBPA 22-0120. Mr. Wilson?
Motion to grant extension. Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie, Mr. Roadley.
Yes.
Motion passes.
I see no matters of special privilege. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I would make a motion to adjourn.
So moved. We are adjourned.